How are you guys doing? Today is Friday, December 10th, 2021. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to walk through what went down in the group stage round for the 2021-2022 UEFA Champions League season, as we went from 32 teams competing down to 16, and in a few days, the FIFA and UEFA will draw the remaining teams to see which teams will match up against each other in the round of 16. But meanwhile, through the 6 group stage matchups that every team had to play, they had to compete with 3 other teams in their table. The top 2 teams from each 4-team table were the teams that advanced at least to this round. The teams that finished third in their table were relegated to at least compete in Europa League, and the teams that finished in the very bottom of their table did not qualify for either Champions League or Europa League. But with that said, just going through how it works, I'm just going to go through every single league and walk through every single team's path in order to get here. Starting off with Group A, this was the group that contained the reigning Premier League champion, and this year, and going in, that team was Man City. Manchester City finished this group stage round with 4 wins and 2 losses, taking you how they fared through all of their single matchups. Their first matchup was against Leipzig, and that was, of course, at home. And when they were able to face off against Leipzig at home, they were able to pull off a 6-3 big win at home, as their last goal came from Gabriel Jesus. They were also able to get a penalty kick from Riyad Mahrez and Jack Grealish as well. Following that big matchup, they had 3 points in the table. Going into their second match day, they would go on to face off against Paris Saint-Germain in Paris. In this matchup, PSG ended up beating Man City. That was when Lionel Messi scored his very first goal in a Paris Saint-Germain uniform. So following the second week, they still had 3 points in the table. Going into their third matchup, they would go on to face off against Club Brugge, the reigning Belgian champs in Belgium. Man City would end up beating Club Brugge in October. They won this matchup 5-1, as they would end up getting 2 goals from their Algerian forward Riyad Mahrez, not to mention a goal from their young midfielder Cole Palmer. Following that matchup, they had 6 points in the table. Going into their fourth matchup, going into the second round of facing every single team, they would face off against Club Brugge in week 4 for their rematch. They would end up beating Club Brugge 4-1 to pick up their 3rd win in Champions League, as their goals came from Phil Foden, Riyad Mahrez, Raheem Sterling, their elite English winger, and Gabriel Jesus, their young Brazilian forward. And following that matchup, they had 9 points in the table. Going into their 5th match day, they would host PSG and then pull off the 2-1 win. Their first goal coming from their elite English forward Raheem Sterling, and Gabriel Jesus scoring the second one, as Kylian Mbappe scored the lone goal for PSG, which gave Man City the advantage over PSG in the table. And then last but not least, looking into their final matchup, they would have to face off, or just looking at Man City, they would face off against RB Leipzig in Leipzig, and they would fall short 2-1, as their lone goal came from Riyad Mahrez. Nonetheless, they finish at the very top of the table, and they will advance to the next round, where they will be drawn against a team that finished runner-up in their group. Looking at the second team in that group, PSG will go on to finish with 11 points. After PSG will go on to win 3 of their matches. They drew 2, and they only lost 1. Their only loss coming against Manchester City. But looking at how they went week to week, starting off with their very first matchup, they would end up drawing against Club Brugge in Belgium, as their lone goal came from Ander Herrera in the 15th minute. So following that matchup, they had 1 point in the table. Their second matchup would see them beating Manchester City 2-0, as their first goal came from Idrissa Gueye, and their second goal came from their goated Argentinian midfielder Lionel Messi, the first goal that he scored with the team, a goal that many PSG fans were waiting for. Following their second matchup, they had 4 points in the table. In their third week, they would end up beating Leipzig at home. They beat them 3-2, their first goal coming from Kylian Mbappe, and their next 2 coming from their goated midfielder Lionel Messi, their third being a penalty kick. So following that matchup, they had 7 points in the table. In week 4, PSG would end up drawing versus Leipzig in this matchup. And this would come after they had originally beat Leipzig the first time. In this matchup, both their goals will come from Georginio Wijnaldum in order to help them get their 1 point. And then following this matchup, they would go on to lose to Man City, picking up their lone loss on November 24th, as their lone goal came from Kylian Mbappe. And then going into their week 5 matchup, PSG would go on to face off against Club Brugge, picking up a win at home, getting 2 goals from their elite young French forward, Kylian Mbappe, and 2 goals from their goated Argentinian midfielder, Lionel Messi. They finished with 1 less point than Manchester City, so Manchester City will get the advantage, meaning PSG will be drawn to face off against a team that won their group. And then, of course, third place went to RB Leipzig as they finished with 7 points in the group. They will be relegated to Europa League. And fourth place went to Club Brugge as they have failed to qualify for either. Taking a look at the teams that qualified for Group B, of course, starting off with the reigning La Liga champs, Atletico Madrid. This was the group that featured Atletico Madrid, but the team that would finish on top of Group B was actually Liverpool. Liverpool will go on to win all 6 of their matches in Champions League, as they had a goal differential of 11 for all 6 games. In their very first matchup in Group 1, Liverpool will go on to host Milan, pulling off a 3-2 win. Their first goal coming off of an own goal. Their second goal coming from their elite Egyptian forward, Mo Salah, and then their third goal coming from the English captain, Jordan Henderson. So following that matchup, they had 3 points in the table. Going into their second matchup, Liverpool would go on to Liverpool face off against Porto in Portugal, but Liverpool will pull off the 5-1 win to remain undefeated. They would get 2 goals from their elite Egyptian forward, Mo Salah, and they were also able to get another goal from Sadio Mane, the other elite winger, and Roberto Firmino would end up with with an additional brace in the second half. As with this win, Liverpool was able to jump up another 3 points in the table. Going into Group 3, Liverpool would, of course, go on to smash Atletico Madrid in Madrid after Atletico Madrid drew a red card on Antoine Griezmann in the beginning of the second half. Liverpool will get 2 goals from Mo Salah, their elite Egyptian forward, as their second goal came from Naby Keita in the 13th minute to put them up by 2. Griezmann would score 2 goals for Atletico Madrid, but it wouldn't be enough, and I'll get to Atletico Madrid when I get there. But following this matchup, Liverpool, they were 3-0. They had won all 3 of their matchups. In the fourth matchup, they would host Atletico Madrid as they pulled off a 2-0 win. Their goals coming from Diogo Jota and Sadio Mane in the very first half, giving them 12 points in the table through 4 weeks. In match day 5, Liverpool would host Porto and pull off a 2-0 win shutout, as their 2 goals came from their elite Spanish midfielder, Thiago Alcantara, and their elite Egyptian forward, Mo Salah. And then going into their last matchup, Liverpool would go on, of course, to beat Milan in Milan, as their goals came from Mohamed Salah and Divock Origi after Milan's own goal was scored, after their goal was scored in the 28th minute by Fikayo Tomori. Following this win, like I said, Liverpool sitting on top. They will go on to face against a team. They're going to face off against a team that finished as runner-up in their group. Looking at the team that finished second in Group B, it was Atletico Madrid. They finished with 7 points in the table. They won 2 of their matchups. They drew 1, and they ended up losing 3, but they still had 2 more points than Porto, which advanced them to this round. Starting with their very first matchup, the reigning La Liga champs would end up drawing 0-0 to Porto after Porto picked up a red card in the 95th minute. Following this, they only had 1 point. Going into their second matchup, they would face off against Milan in Milan, beating Milan 2-1. There are 2 goals coming from their elite French forward Antoine Griezmann and their elite Uruguayan striker Luis Suarez off of a penalty kick in the 97th minute to give them the win, which was a very big one for them. In match day 3, Atletico Madrid would fall short to Liverpool, losing 3-2 after Griezmann would score a brace in the first half and pick up a red card in the second. So following that matchup, they still had 4 points in the table. Going into match day 4, Atletico Madrid would end up losing to Liverpool, as that would be their second straight loss in Champions League, as they were completely shut out. They would still have 4 points in Champions League through 4 matchups. Of course, in round 5, they would go on to fall short to Milan. Milan beat them 1-0. Milan's only goal coming from Junior Macias. So for Atletico Madrid, it would have to come down to the last game. They came into match day 6 with 4 points, and in match day 6, they would end up beating Porto 3-1, despite both teams drawing red cards. Porto actually drew 2 red cards. Atletico's first goal would come from their elite French forward Antoine Griezmann, and they would score all 3 of their goals before Porto scored their lone goal, which gave Atletico just enough to make it into the second round. Because they were runners-up, they will have to face off against a team that ended up winning their division, or that ended up winning their group. And because Porto finished 3rd, they will be relegated to Europa League, and Milan will qualify for neither. Taking a look at how everything went with Group C, starting off with the reigning Portuguese champs. This was the group that featured Portuguese champs Sporting CP, but the winners of this group would end up being Ajax, the reigning Dutch champs, and Ajax would actually go perfectly undefeated in this group. They would win all 6 of their matchups. Starting in match day 1, Ajax would first face off against Sporting CP, the reigning Portuguese champs, and pull off a 5-1 win, as 4 of their goals came from their striker Sebastian Haller, and then Steven Berghuis would score in the 39th minute as well, as Ajax would pick up this first win, and they would have 3 points after match day 1. And then looking at what went down in match day 2, Ajax would, of course, go on to face off against Besiktas from Turkey. They pulled off a 2-0 win, as Spurgai scored the first goal. Sebastian Haller scored the second, so that would help put them up with 6 points in the table. Their third matchup would see them face off against Dortmund, where they ended up shutting out Dortmund at home in October. They would end up scoring off of a Royce own goal. And their third goal coming from Antony from Brazil, Sebastian Haller scoring the 4th, Daley Blind scoring their second goal. As following through the halfway point, Ajax was perfect with 3 wins in 3 matchups. Following this would transition them into their group to their match day 4, where they would face off against Dortmund, this time in Germany, and then they would pull off a 3-1 win, as Sebastian Haller would score their second goal, Dusan Tadic to score their first, and Davy Klaassen scored their third, giving them 12 points through 4 matchups. In Ajax's week 5 matchup, or in their 5th Champions League matchup, they would have to face off, of course, against Besiktas from Turkey. They would pull off a 2-1 win, as both of their goals came from Sebastian Haller in the second half. And then this would transition into their 6th matchup, where Ajax, of course, would have to face off against Sporting. They would win this matchup 4-2. Their first goal came from Sebastian Haller off of a penalty. Sebastian Haller being one of 3 players in being one of the few players in Champions League history to score in every single Champions League game this season for Ajax. So just to give a sense of how well he was playing. After him, Antony scored in the 42nd minute, David Neres in the 58th, and Steven Berghuis in the 62nd. So following all 6 of these matchups, Ajax is still undefeated in Champions League with a goal differential of 20-5 at this moment. And because they have 18, they will go on to face off against the team that finished runner-up in their group. The team that finished runner-up in Group C was Sporting CP, the reigning Portuguese champs. In their first matchup, they would end up losing 5-1, as their lone goal came from Paulinho. Transitioning into their second matchup, however, going in with 0 points, they would go on to fall short. They lost to Dortmund 1-0, as Daniel Malins would score the lone goal in this matchup. Through 2 matchups, Sporting had 0 points. In matchup day 3, they of course would go on to beat Besiktas 4-1 in Turkey, as 2 of their goals came from Sebastian Coates. Paulo Sarabia scored their third goal off of a penalty kick, and Paulinho's 89th minute goal would at least get Sporting back into the momentum of things. Following this matchup, they had 3 points through 3 match days. In match day 4, they would end up beating Besiktas 4-0 yet again, as Pedro Goncalves was able to score 2 of them. Paulinho scored their third, and Pablo Sarabia scored their fourth, giving them 6 points through match day 4. Going into match day 5, they would end up actually beating Dortmund 3-1, as 2 of their goals came from Pedro Goncalves, and Pedro Porro would score their last goal to put them up and above. And then this would transition them into their 6th matchup, where they would eventually find themselves losing 4-2 to Ajax, as both their goals came from Nuno Santos and Bruno Tabata. They would go on to finish with as many points as Dortmund in the table. However, since their goal differential was actually higher, Sporting would actually be the team to get the nod over Dortmund, and because Dortmund would end up losing that tiebreaker, Dortmund now is the team that will be relegated to Europa League play. And since Besiktas was unable to win any of those games, Besiktas will not be advancing to any tournament after this. Taking a look at what's going on in Group D, and this was the group that featured the reigning Serie A champs, Inter Milan. The team that finished at the top of Group D was actually Real Madrid, as they won 5 of the 6 games. And the only game they didn't win, they lost. Looking at their first matchup, they ended up beating Inter 1-0, as their lone goal came from Rodrigo in the 89th minute. Following that first matchup, Real Madrid would end up losing 2-1 to Sheriff Tiraspol, the reigning Moldovan champs. Real Madrid's lone goal came off of a penalty kick from Karim Benzema, before Sebastian Till would end up giving Sheriff Tiraspol the advantage and what they needed to win this matchup. So following group stage match 2, Real Madrid only had 3 points, but they would go on to win out for the rest of the tournament. In match day 3, Real Madrid would go on to face off against Shakhtar Donetsk, pulling off a 5-0 win against the Ukrainian side. As they would score their first goal off of an own goal. They got 2 goals from their young Brazilian forward, Vinicius Jr. Rodrigo would score in the 65th minute, and then they would get their last goal from their elite French striker, Karim Benzema, giving them 6 points through 3 match days. Going into match day 4, Real Madrid, of course, would go on to face off against Shakhtar Donetsk, this time in Madrid, as both of their goals came from their elite French striker, Karim Benzema. Following this matchup, they had 9 points through 4 match days. In match day 5, Real Madrid would find themselves facing off against Sheriff Tiraspol in Moldova, this time for the rematch. Real Madrid would end up beating Sheriff 3-0, as their first goal came from their elite Austrian defender and midfielder, David Alaba. Their second goal would come from their elite German midfielder, Toni Kroos, and their third goal would come from their elite French striker, Karim Benzema, giving them 12 points through 5 match days. And of course, last but not least, they were able to pull off a 2-0 win at home versus Inter after Inter drew a red card. Their goals came from Toni Kroos, their elite German midfielder, and Marco Asensio, their Spanish attacker, in the 79th minute. And following this, Real Madrid, with 15 points, went on to win their group. And now, going into the drawing stage, they will face off against the team that finished runner-up in their group. Looking at the team that finished runner-up in Group D, Inter Milan, the reigning Serie A champs, finished with 10 points. They would end up winning 3 of their 6 matches. They drew 1, and they ended up losing 2. Taking you through Inter's road here, they would end up losing their first matchup versus Real Madrid 1-0, as Rodrigo's 89th minute goal was the only goal scored that game. Through match week 1, they had no points. In match week 2, they would end up drawing with Shakhtar Donetsk, as following that matchup, they were 0-0. They only had 1 point through 2 match days. And then taking a look at how it fared from here, Inter would end up beating Sheriff in match day 3. They beat them 3-1. They would get their goals from Edin Dzeko, Arturo Vidal, and Stefan de Vrij. So following that, they had 4 points in the table. Going into their 4th match day, they would end up beating Sheriff again to put them up to 7 points. They beat them 3-1 yet again, as their 3 goals came from Marcelo Brozovic, Milan Skriniar, and Alexis Sanchez. All their 3 goals coming in the second half. But following this matchup, they had 7 points. Going into match day 5, they, of course, will go on to beat Shakhtar Donetsk at home 2-0, as both of their goals came from Edin Dzeko. And this would transition them into their final matchup where they faced off against Real Madrid, and they fell short 2-0 after Nicolo Barella picked up a red card in the 64th minute. As they finish with 10 points in the table, they will advance to Champions League stage. They will face off against a team that won their group, and they finished 3 points ahead of Sheriff Tiraspol, who finished with 7 points in the table. They will be relegated to Europa League, and Shakhtar Donetsk, finishing at the bottom of Group D, will not advance. Now taking a look at Group E, which featured the reigning Bundesliga champions Bayern. Bayern Munich were just like Ajax and Liverpool were one of 3 teams to advance all the way through group stage after winning all 6 of their matchups with a 19-goal differential, as they scored 22 goals and only allowed 3 all Champions League. Taking a look at their very first matchup, they would end up shutting out Barcelona 3-0, as their first goal came from their goated German midfielder Thomas Müller, and they would end up getting 2 goals from their goated Polish striker Robert Lewandowski. Taking a look at Bayern's second matchup, coming in with 2 points, Bayern would go on to beat Dynamo Kiev 5-0 in Munich, as their first 2 goals would come from their goated Polish striker Robert Lewandowski. Their third goal would come from their elite German winger Serge Gnabry. Their fourth goal came from their other elite winger Leroy Sané, and their last goal would come from their backup striker Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting. Following that matchup, Bayern had 6 points in the table. Going into their third matchup, they would face off against Benfica in Portugal, and Bayern would end up beating Benfica 4-0, as their first 2 goals came from their elite German winger Leroy Sané. Their third goal ended up being scored off of a Benfica own goal, and Robert Lewandowski, Bayern's goated Polish striker, would score in his 3rd game in the tournament. Following the midway point, Bayern would find themselves facing off against Benfica again. They would end up beating Benfica in Munich 5-2, as 3 of their goals would come from their goated Polish striker Robert Lewandowski, and they were also able to get a goal from their elite German duo of Serge Gnabry and Leroy Sané. So following their 4th matchup, they had 12 points in the table. Going into their 5th match day, they would end up beating Dynamo Kiev 2-1, as Robert Lewandowski, with their goated Polish striker, would score in the 14th minute. Kingsley Coman would score in the 42nd, in order to help Bayern advance. And that 1 goal against Kiev was the 3rd goal they allowed all Champions League. But through 5 Champions League matches, they had 5 points, and then going into their 6th, they would go on to shut Barcelona out 3-0, as their 3 goals came from their goated German midfielder Thomas Müller, their elite German winger Leroy Sané, and their young midfielder Jamal Musiala. And through this, they were able to be perfect, and now that they've come through the other side of group stage undefeated, they will face off in the round of 16 against a team that finished runner-up in their group. Taking a look now at what's going on with the runners-up in Group E, the runner-up was given to Benfica out of Portugal. They finished with 2 wins, 2 draws, and 2 losses, 1 point ahead of Barcelona at the very end of the table. In their very first matchup, Benfica would go on to draw 0-0 with Dynamo Kiev. Looking at their second matchup, they would looking at how they fared, they would actually end up beating Barcelona 3-0. 2 of their goals were scored by Darwin Nunez, and then Rafa Silva was able to score their second in the 69th minute. And Barca was even able to pick up a red card in that game. So following match day 2, Benfica had 4 points in the table. Going into their third matchup, they would end up getting sloshed 4-0 by Bayern, as they were unable to put up a point. And they were also they also lost to Bayern in group stage 4, as they lost 5-2 as well. So going into group 5, they had 4 points. In match day 5, Benfica would end up drawing with Barcelona 0-0, giving them 5 points for the group going into match day 6. And considering they were behind Barcelona, and Barcelona could have made it through if they beat Bayern. It seems as though, or it looks as though Benfica actually jumped right in front of Barcelona at the very last second with this 2-0 win, beating Dynamo Kiev as they got their 2 goals from Roman Yaremchuk and Gilberto Moraes Jr. So with this win, Benfica finished as the runner-up in their group. Now they are going to have to face off against a team that won their group for the round of 16. And following this, Barcelona would finish with 7 points, and Barcelona is now being relegated to Europa League for the first time since, I believe, Messi's debut season. And of course, finishing at the bottom with 1 point, Dynamo Kiev will not advance. To see what's going on next. Taking a look now at what's going on with Group F that featured the reigning Europa League champions, Villarreal. The team that finished on top of Group F was Manchester United, who finished with 3 wins, 2 draws, and a loss, as they finished with 11 points in the table to end their Champions League group stage bout. Looking at their first matchup, they ended up losing their first matchup versus Young Boys, as their lone goal came from their goated Portuguese forward, Cristiano Ronaldo, in the 13th minute. Young Boys would end up scoring to tie it in the 66th minute, and they would end up scoring in the 95th minute to run away with this matchup. So Man United came away with no points after match day 1, and that was actually their only loss of Champions League. Their second matchup in Champions League would see them beating Villarreal in Manchester 2-1. Their 2 goals coming from Alex Reyes in the 60th minute, and Cristiano Ronaldo would end up scoring the tiebreaker in the 95th minute to give Man U the win. So they had 4 points following match day 2. And match day 3, they would host Atalanta, pulling off a 3-2 win, as their goals would come from their elite English forward, Marcus Rashford. They would get another goal from their English defender, Harry Maguire, and they would get a third goal from their goated Portuguese forward, Cristiano Ronaldo, in the 81st minute. And following that, Man U had 6 points in the table after they had lost their very first game. Going into their fourth matchup, they would end up drawing with Atalanta in Italy, as both of Man U's goals would come from Cristiano Ronaldo, both in extra time for both halves, as he had to tie it up in the 91st minute to give them a point. And with that point, they had 7 points in the table through 4 match days. Looking at what happened in match day 5, Man U went to Spain and was able to beat Villarreal 2-0, as their first goal came from their goated Portuguese forward, Cristiano Ronaldo. Their second coming from their young elite English forward, Jadon Sancho, in the 90th minute. And following that matchup, Man U had 10 points in the table. And then going into their final matchup for match day 6, Manchester United would end up drawing with Young Boys, the team that ended up beating them, as Man U's lone goal ended up coming from Mason Greenwood, but they still sit 1 point ahead of second place Villarreal. Villarreal made it here after finishing with 10 points. They would win 3 games just like Man U. They would end up drawing 1 matchup, and they ended up losing 2, both of their losses coming against Manchester United. Looking at their journey to get here, in their first match day, they drew versus Atalanta 2-2, as their goals came from Manu Trigueros and Arnaud Danjuma. Following this matchup, they had 1 point in group stage. In their second matchup, they ended up losing to Man U, as their lone goal came from Paco Alcacer. Following match day 2, they only had 1 point in the table. In match day 3, they would end up beating Young Boys 4-1, as their goals came from Jeremy Pino, Gerard Moreno, Alberto Moreno, and Samuel Chukwueze. And following this matchup, Villarreal would, of course, go down with 4 points in the table following these matchups. In match day 4, they would, of course, Villarreal would go on to beat Young Boys 2-0, as their 2 goals came from Etienne Capulle and Arnaud Danjuma. So that would give them 7 points in the table. In week 5, they would end up losing to Man U, as they were unable to score at all. That was when Ronaldo and Jadon Sancho were combined and scored their 2 goals on them. And then taking a look at Villarreal's 6th and final matchup to make it here, they would end up beating Atalanta 3-2 on a delayed game. And if Atalanta had won that matchup, Atalanta would be the team that would be sitting here as well. It would end as Villarreal's 3 goals came from Arnaud Danjuma to score the first goal. Etienne Capulle scored the 42nd goal, and Danjuma scored the third goal to put them them up 3-0. Atalanta scored 2 goals following that, but it wouldn't be enough, and Villarreal had the 3 points they needed to advance. But finishing third, Atalanta have had 6 points in the table, and they are going to be relegated to Europa League as they'll be facing off there. And considering Young Boys finished at the bottom with 5 points, Young Boys will not advance to a round of international soccer beyond this. Taking a look now at what is going on in Group G, but before I say it, Villarreal finishing second, they will have to face off against the champion of a group, and Man U will face off against a runner-up. Now jumping to Group G, which featured the reigning Ligue 1 champs, LOSC Lille. Lille would end up winning their group with 11 points as they won 3, drew 2, and lost 1 of their 6 matchups. Taking you through how each of them went. In their first matchup, they ended up drawing 0-0 versus Wolfsburg after a player from Wolfsburg picked up a red card. So after match day 1, they had 1 point. In match day 2, they ended up losing to RB Salzburg 2-1 as their lone goal came from Burak Yilmaz. So following match day 2, they only had 1 point in the table. In match day 3, LOSC Lille would go on to draw versus Sevilla. So following match day 3, they only had 2 points in the table. They would go on to win out the rest of the tournament in order to eke out a spot for themselves. In match day 4, they would end up beating Sevilla 2-1 in Spain as their goals came from Jonathan David's penalty, and then Nani Tomo Ikone's 51st minute goal that would break the tie and give LOSC 5 points in the table. In their 5th group matchup, LOSC would end up hosting RB Salzburg and pulling off a 1-0 win as their lone goal came from Jonathan David, which gave them 8 points in the table. And then while they were still fighting, going into their 6th and final matchup, they would go to Wolfsburg in Germany and pull off a 3-1 win. Their 3 goals coming from Burak Yilmaz, Jonathan David, and Angel Gomez to score the first 3 goals of the game and run away with a spot in the Champions League table. And because they won their group, they are going to face off against a runner-up within another group. And looking at the team that finished second, RB Salzburg finished with 10 points after they finished with 3 wins, a draw, and 2 losses of those 6 matches as they finished with 1 less point than LOSC for the group. Looking at how RB Salzburg made it here in match day 1, they ended up drawing versus Sevilla as their lone goal came from Lukas Sušić as his penalty would even Ivan Rakitic's penalty. So following match day 1, RB Salzburg had 1 point in the table. In match day 2, they would end up beating LOSC Lille 2-1 as their 2 goals came from penalty kicks from Karim Adeyemi. So following match day 2, RB Leipzig had 4 points in the table. In match day 3, RB Salzburg would end up beating Wolfsburg 3-1 as Karim Adeyemi scored the first goal. Noah Okafor scored 2. He scored a brace in the second half in order to break the tie. So following match day 3, they had 7 points effectively in the table. Jumping out to match day 4, they ended up taking a look at how they fared. They fell short to Wolfsburg 2-1. Their lone goal came from Maximilian Vober in the 30th minute. They still had 7 points in the table through match day 4. Taking a look at how they fared in match day 5, RB Salzburg fell short to LOSC Lille 1-0, and they still had 7 points in the table going into their final matchup of the season. And taking a look at how they fared, RB Salzburg would end up actually beating Sevilla 1-0 after Noah Okafor's lone goal in the 50th minute. And that would be a very big reason that this team was actually able to make it there in the first place. And following that, following that, now RB Salzburg now sits second in Group G. And because Sevilla finished with 6 points in the table, they finished third and they will be relegated to Europa League play. And Wolfsburg will not be advancing past this. LOSC finishing at the top will face off against a runner-up in a different group, and RB Salzburg finishing as the runner-up will face off against the team that won their group in the round of 16. Last but not least, taking you through Group H, which contains the Champions League defending champs Chelsea. The winner of Group H actually ended up being Juventus coming out of Italy, as Juventus finished with 15 points in the table, only losing one game, and like I said, they would win 5 of their 6 games. Taking a look at how Juventus made it here, they would win their first matchup against Malmo in Sweden, as their goals came from Alexandro. Their elite Argentinian forward Paulo Dybala would score a penalty kick, and Alvaro Morata, the Spanish striker, would help give Juventus 3 goals and 3 points for the table's sake. Taking a look at their second matchup, they would actually host and defeat the defending Champions League winners Chelsea. The lone goal coming from Federico Chiesa, their Italian striker their Italian forward, in the 56th minute to give them 6 points in the table through 2 weeks. In their third matchup, they would face off against Zenit St. Petersburg in Russia and pull off a 1-0 win, as Juventus' lone goal came from Dejan Kulusevski. So following that, they had 9 points through the 3 matchups. Taking a look at what went down in match day 4, Juventus hosted Zenit St. Petersburg in early November, pulled off a 4-2 win, as their first 2 goals would come from their elite Argentinian attacker Paulo Dybala. Their third goal coming from their Italian forward Federico Chiesa, and their fourth goal coming from their Spanish striker Alvaro Morata. So they had 12 points in Champions League through the first 4 matchups. In match day 5, they would actually end up getting shut out 4-0 by Chelsea, as they were unable to score there. But going into match day 6, they had 12 points, and with the chance to run away with it, they were able to beat Malmo 1-0, as Moise Kean's 18th minute goal was the only goal scored all game. And because Chelsea actually drew within their last game, that was actually the difference that gave Juventus the win and gave them the 2 points that they needed to win. And then looking at how it stands on the table, with this win, Juventus will face off against a runner-up from a different group for the round of 16. And looking at the team that finished up in the round of 16 for this group, Chelsea would finish with 13 points in the table, as they won 4 of the 6 games. They drew 1 and they lost 1 as well. Starting from the very beginning of their run, they would end up beating Zenit in their first game 1-0, with the lone goal of the game coming from their elite Belgian striker, Romelu Lukaku. Taking a look at how their second matchup fared, they would end up losing to Juventus 1-0, and that was the game where Federico Chiesa scored the only goal of the game. Following match day 2, Chelsea had 3 points in the table. In match day 3, Chelsea would end up beating Malmo 4-0, as their first goal came from Andreas Christensen. They would get 2 penalty kick goals from their Italian midfielder Jorginho, and they would get their third goal would come in the 48th minute from their elite German midfielder Kai Havertz, giving them 6 points through 3 matchups. Going into the second half, they would not lose in the second half. In match day 4, Chelsea would, of course, face off against Malmo in Sweden, pulling off a 1-0 win, their lone goal coming from Hakim Ziyech. Following this matchup, they had 9 points through 4 matchups. In match day 5, they would end up beating Juventus 4-0, as their goals came from Trevor Chalobah, Reece James, Callum Hudson-Odoi, and then their last goal would come from their elite German striker Timo Werner. So that would be 12 points in the table, which tied them with Juventus going into match day 6. And then in match day 6, with a chance to possibly take the lead, to win their table on goal differential, they ended up drawing with Zenit St. Petersburg 3-3, as their first goal came from their elite German striker Timo Werner. Their second goal came from their elite Belgian striker Romelu Lukaku. And then their last goal come from Timo Werner, as he would finish with a brace for the day. With this draw, they finished 2 points below Juve, meaning that they will face off against the top team from another group. And Zenit finished third with 5 points, meaning that they will be relegated to Europa League, and Malmo will drop to 1. With that said, this is how all of the 32 teams are going to enter the top of the 2022 calendar year, especially as they enter their respective tournaments. As I go through it again, the teams that finish at the very top of their table and the teams that are scheduled to face off against runners-up from other groups are Manchester City and Liverpool, and Manchester United from the Premier League. There's Ajax from the Dutch league. You have Real Madrid from Spain, Bayern Munich from Germany, LOSC Lille from France, and Juventus from Italy. Looking at the teams that are that are runners up, that are going to face off against champions in the next round, you're going to have PSG from the Ligue 1 in France. You're going to have Atletico Madrid Atletico Madrid in Villarreal from La Liga in Spain. Sporting CP and Benfica are going to represent the Portuguese teams in Champions League that are facing off against the group stage winners. Inter Milan is going to represent the Serie A. At the same time, RB Salzburg is the lone team in the round of 16 that is representing Austria. And not to mention that Chelsea is the lone team that finished second in their group that is going to have to face off against a team that won their group. Looking at the 8 teams that will be relegated to Europa League play as a result of finishing third in their group. Starting off with the German teams, RB Leipzig and Borussia Dortmund are going to be the 2 teams representing Germany in Europa League from Champions League. Porto is going to be the lone team that represents Portugal in Europa League. Sheriff Tiraspol is going to represent Moldova. Barcelona and Sevilla are going to represent Spain in La Liga. Atalanta is going to represent Italy in Serie A, and Zenit St. Petersburg is going to represent Russia. And then, of course, looking at the 8 teams that did not qualify for either Europa League or Champions League that qualify for the Champions League round of 32, you have Club Brugge from Belgium, you have AC Milan from Italy, there's Besiktas from Turkey, Shakhtar Donetsk and Dynamo Kiev from Ukraine, Young Boys from Switzerland, Wolfsburg from Germany, and Malmo from Sweden. With that said, that is how we are entering the round of 16 in Champions League. I want to thank everyone for listening to all 41 minutes of this piece. I do want to thank the various Champions League and UEFA and FIFA websites for giving me all the facts that I need. And of course, once all of today's matchups and exhibitions are done, I will come back tomorrow on Saturday, December 11th for another episode of The Elite. And of course, once all of these 16 teams have effectively been drawn and the matchups have been made, I will do a preview for the round of 16 for the Champions League, for the Champions League tournament. And until then, I want to thank everyone for following along with me as we navigate through the world of sports one day at a time. I'm James Sims, and I'll catch you with another piece tomorrow. Peace out.